Hello and welcome. You're with me on a fresh new episode of the Global Reset on CNBC TV18 Prime. I'm Prashant. Let's focus on the top story from overnight. The screens and everything has completely changed. US President Donald Trump announced in a post on Truth Social that a complete and total ceasefire between Israel and Iran would go into force with a view to ending the conflict between the two nations. In a second post, he added, and I quote, "Israel and Iran came to me almost simultaneously and said, 'Peace.' I knew the time was now. The world and the Middle East are the real winners. Both nations will see tremendous love, peace, and prosperity in their futures. They have so much to gain and yet so much to lose if they stray from the road of righteousness and truth. The future for Israel and Iran is unlimited and filled with great promise." End of quote. Meanwhile, in a dramatic turn of events, after initially denying Trump's ceasefire claims, Iranian Foreign Minister took to Twitter to mark a U-turn, saying, and I quote, "The military operations of our powerful armed forces to punish Israel for its aggression continued until the very last minute at 4 a.m. Together with all Iranians, I thank our brave armed forces who remain ready to defend our dear country until their last drop of blood, and who responded to any attacks by the enemy until the very last minute." End of quote. Now, all of this, of course, have resulted in some pretty dramatic moves as far as the price of oil is concerned. So really gyrated it big time. So from yesterday's high of about $80 on Brent, prices fell point to point at 1.15%. That is massive. What's, of course, left to see is if whether or not the truce is, which Trump has helped to strike, is going to sort of stay, which is going to hold on or not, or whether, we'll see violations as we go along. But, if you just look at prices, etc., it looks like, they are very much here to stay. That the market believes that the ceasefire will hold and both parties are going to hold fire as well. Now, Donald Trump took to Twitter yet again, saying the ceasefire is now in effect. Please do not violate. End of quote. It was a pretty brief sort of comment, a post which just came through, and almost like a warning, but a pretty curt one at that. The latest news coming in, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu also has acknowledged the ceasefire. While we continue to monitor the developments, Netanyahu has said that Israel has achieved their goals of removing Iranian nuclear and ballistic missile threats. Additionally, he extends gratitude to the U.S. presidents. He acknowledged U.S.'s support in defense and participation in removing the nuclear threat as far as Iran is concerned. Earlier last evening, you had White House National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassid, who said that America's involvement in the strikes on Iran had not really disrupted oil markets. Just want to play that soundbite in, and then we'll bring in an expert to talk about all of this.
Well, so far, the American actions have been extremely targeted and have not really disrupted global oil markets. If you look at the excess reserves that oil-producing countries have around the world, it's maybe about 3 times as big as total Iranian production. I think that we're highly confident that we have the votes to get it through the Senate, through the House, and get it signed by the 4th of July. And highly confident is really based on person-to-person conversations. I know that there's some people that are still holding out for this or for that, but I think the president is highly confident that we're going to pass this bill and we're going to pass it by the 4th of July.
Well, joining us now to discuss this in some detail is someone who got it, bang right. Richard Redoglia is CEO at Matrix Global. Richard, welcome back to the program. Congratulations. What can I say? Rarely does someone get it so right, so fast. That's the other point, right? You said yesterday that prices perhaps should climb down to the 60, 65 zones, and they're exactly in the ballpark where they've fallen. Very, very dramatic turn of events, Richard, but you called it. So take us through what your thought process now is. Should there be any doubt that the ceasefire will hold?
I think it's, again, that's above my pay grade, right? How ceasefires will go, how military conflict will happen is something none of us know. But what we do know is that, and I've said this before, information travels remarkably fast now. And after watching this market for over 4 decades, this is not the first major move we've seen. We've had multiple attacks on in the Middle East. We've had wars. We've had the Ukraine war. We've had things that affected supply. We've had economic collapses. But information allows for the market and money to follow, kind of to position itself. And there's 2 or 3 things, and I'll try to get them in order here, that I think is important to realize. When Trump came into office, he made a point to say that we're not going to have any forever wars. That was one major point. 2, he made a point, he said, we're going to get energy prices lower. And how do you get energy prices lower? Well, you get energy prices lower by effectively increasing supply. That's the -- way to do it. And so by doing that, he made a kind of a plea, but not really a plea, but just really made an outreach to the OPEC nations, and Saudi Arabia in particular, who I believe MBS appreciates what the U.S. is doing. Said, look, let's get prices under control. What's interesting is, as we go into the 4th of July weekend here this year, here you have the prices going down significantly across the United States based on significant military action and decision-making by President Trump. What you had 2 years ago under President Biden was the release of crude oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, a kind of a weak sister move that was trying to bring prices down artificially. And so what we've experienced here is a market and money that is effectively saying, you know what? The market seems to be, and we've said this multiple times, oversupplied by 5 to 6 million barrels a day. Those barrels are now starting to be released into the marketplace. We've discussed that. And that is the major reason for this price to go down. Now, why'd we go up? Well, as I had mentioned in a prior segment, one of the major things that was going on was the market was particularly short. The money, the way that people traded was short. And it was long gold and short oil. And really what was happening was they believed that what Trump was going to do was get prices down. And they were down. They went down to as low as $55, and they are big control. All of those shorts over the past 10 days have been wiped out. They've taken their positions, have been taken off. The market spiked up. Well, guess what? They want to put them back on again. And that is what we're seeing. So not only were we down $12 yesterday off of its highs, but looking at the market right now, we're down $3.50 today. And so what we're experiencing is shorts coming back into the marketplace. They understand that the supply-demand balance is effectively, there's more supply than what the current demand is, and that is putting pressure on prices across the board. Ironically, or not ironically, gold is down $100 in the last 7 days. So we're seeing, I think, a big sigh of relief here in the world.
How's the oil market positioning, Richard?
I believe that the money in the markets is being short. So that means they're not going to be looking to build long positions. That they feel it's well balanced. That OPEC. Now remember, OPEC Plus is still in control. The market is in a thing called backwardation, where the spot price is above the futures prices. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the market is bullish. It just means that the current absolute supply that's available it's not overwhelming the storage, right? There's enough barrels meeting demand being supplied. There's not necessarily huge amounts of storage in the marketplace. When markets get oversupplied, that is when there becomes so much oil that the storage starts to fill up, then it moves into a situation called contango, which is where the spot prices are below the future, above the prices in the future. But as we speak right now, I think what the market is doing is repositioning itself on the short side. It's going to be cautious because there still is activity in the Persian Gulf. It's not over. We can't be naive about this. Something could go wrong. But I think what we're at is the market is viewing that the overall picture for oil is going to be one where prices are going to start to trend to the downside into a level where they'll find support maybe 5 to, I'd say about $10 lower than where we currently are.
So another $10 downside in the near term, possible essentially, Richard?
I wouldn't say the near term.
Okay.
When markets make huge moves like this, it takes the people who've been short, well, they're going to want to take some profits too, right?
Yeah.
All it takes is one news item to cause it to pop back up again. So I think what we're probably looking for is some increased volatility here. Daily ranges are going to be very wide. It's not for the faint of heart to be trading this. The energy stocks are probably going to get hit a little bit on the equity markets. So I think it's going to be a time of trying to balance what's going on. And really, I think the bigger question is, what does this mean for the future? This year, I'm staring at the screen right now, global reset. This is a global reset. This could be one of the largest global resets I think I've seen in a very, very long time, at least in my life in the energy markets, because if it's possible to bring Iran into the fold, if it's even possible, I'm not sure if it is or not, but if you could bring a theocratic government and have it become peaceful, that's a sea change, right? That means less military spending. That means more trade. It probably means more positive economic activity. I'd mentioned, you and I talked just briefly, Syria has been recognized by the U.S. government. Trump has recognized Syria. And I just saw a thing on another station, and it had a person walking around Syria, and all through Syria were signs of Syrians thanking Donald Trump. Now, if someone said to me 2 years or 6 months ago that there are going to be signs in Syria thanking Donald Trump, remember Syria was a backer of Iran, you would have thought you're crazy. But when you change the dynamics that we've experienced here, I think it's something that your title of your show is exactly right. This could be a major global reset.
So and your very, very insightful comments there. So I mean, actually, it's the opposite of, in a way, what's being spoken about, right? Regime change. I mean, actually, with Trump, it's basically, we're willing to work with you just the way you are. We don't really care.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
I mean, that's the realpolitik
that's
of it.
exactly right. That's that's what realpolitik is. That's the exact term of it. It means deal with whoever you have to deal with. I mean, he met Kim Jong Un. People do not like Trump. I fortunately spent 20 years in New York Cities in the 80s and 90s, and Trump was on the front page of the New York Post almost every day. I was used to him. I'm a California now, but I have a New York mindset, and a New York mindset is believe, talk, work it out, see what could come of it. The idea that you have to hate your enemy instead of working with him is illogical. And I would almost believe that what Trump is looking for is not a unipolar world run by the U.S., even though he showed that the U.S. can go anywhere at any time and do anything they want, but more of a multipolar world where people have spheres of influence. Let's all work together. Let's increase our trade. His number one goal is to raise the salaries and the living of the middle and lower class, right? They talk about tax cuts for the rich and all this, and the Democrats, I think, are lost in the woods right now. They don't know which way to turn because this is going against what they thought would happen. To watch the news over here and watch some of the anchors on some of the more liberal broadcasts in real time, watch them say that Iran has agreed to a ceasefire was remarkable. They were tongue-tied. They couldn't figure out how is that possible. And remember, money is going to chase the path of least resistance. And right now in oil, the path of least resistance is down. So it's fallen another 50 cents while we're on the phone. So it's not stopping.
Very, very well put and so well described, but that New York City mindset, right, as you put it, work with people you don't like, but I mean, you don't have to hate them. You can work with them, and I think that's exactly right with everything that we've seen with Trump. I mean, those posts, for example, on Twitter, right? I mean, bomb those sites on Sunday morning, and then those right. Twitter posts, great Iran, great future.
I think he said it. I think he even warned. I think he warned about bombing Russia this morning when Russia said, Medvedev came out and said something, something derogatory about, well, U.S. should not do that to Iran. We might send them some nuclear material. And said, hey, Trump said, hey, we'll nuke you. Don't be careful. So I think it's what drives the left crazy here is that the left in the United States has built itself as this kind of arbitrator of moral authority, and it basically didn't want to hurt anybody's feelings. And so what Obama did was give billions of dollars to the Iranians. They gave billions of dollars to the Palestinian to Hamas. It didn't work out. It went the exact opposite way, and so I'm amazed that the ceasefire came this fast. Again, I don't want to be naive. Let's not be naive here, right? This could be over during this call, but I believe what we saw today when they told Iran told Qatar that they're going to send missiles at him, and they're going to send a certain amount of missiles, and that was the end of the response, and that's all they would do. I think we're going to see Netanyahu come out and say, we're done. Let's get together. And I think ultimately where the peace is going to come from is going to be a Saudi, Russia, a Saudi, Israeli, U.S. kind of backed, let's get together and do something economically beneficial to all of us.
Just to the earlier point, Richard, about working with everyone, right? What next with Iran? I mean, is there need for a nuclear deal if there's no capability now? I mean, that is one. And second, will we see more Iranian sort of oil in the market post all of this?
Well, there's a good question. That's kind of how I focus at this. I've said this. I made this point about Karg Island. Should I repeat my point about Karg Island?
Please. Yes.
The point about Karg Island is it sits like it's an island in the middle of the Persian Gulf. It's a sitting duck. 100% of the exports of Iran, 96, go through Karg Island. How did it not get taken out? Why did not Israel or the U.S. take it out? I believe it didn't take it out because they know that if Iran's going to be a functioning country, it's going to need revenue. It's going to need money. And that was I think a determinant by both the U.S. State Department and the IDF that let's not take that out. Let's leave that there for now, and let's see what kind of negotiations we can have with the Iranian government. Now, what becomes interesting is, remember how OPEC Plus worked. OPEC Plus started in 2016, and it was a way for OPEC to expand the number of players who are producers of oil from outside the normal. I think there was 13 OPEC members initially. Some dropped in, some came out, but I think it's about 30 now, OPEC Plus. It's really the key is really just UAE, Saudis, Iraq, and Russia. Everyone else kind of doesn't matter as much, but those are the ones that matter. And they agreed starting around 2016, and we had huge ups and downs in there, so that we had a lot of things that went on. They said, we're going to curtail oil production because we want to maintain a higher oil price. What's interesting is OPEC production at 30 million barrels is exactly what it was in 1995. Isn't that amazing? OPEC, and so what does that say? It says that U.S. oil production is the largest producer in the world, and the initial attempt by Saudi was to try to squelch U.S. oil production. Well, that didn't work. Well, the person who squelched it was Biden. If the U.S. was its own worst enemy, it stopped LNG exports and it stopped oil. It tried to curtail oil production. But the key factor that really is the driver here is OPEC Plus decided to increase to monitor its production and keep prices in a $65 to $90 range. Kind of the $75 was the point for them that they wanted to. What's going to be interesting is what is going to happen if Iran comes back in. Now, under Biden, we saw production go from about 1 million barrels a day to about 3.3 million barrels a day. But remember, that's only about 1.8 million of exports. So they consume a lot of oil. Just like Saudi Arabia produces 8.5, 9 million, Saudi Arabia also consumes about 4 million barrels a day. So what OPEC produces is different than what they export, right? Because they're consumers of it. What's going to be interesting is, how do you bring in an Iranian partner that is your quote partner, that's someone that you want to help? There's only so much room to do it. Now, I would argue that this kind of partnership that we're able to bring peace to the Middle East, which is just a remarkable statement in itself, could move towards greater economic activity around the world. And so what you end up getting is not just a peaceful Middle East, you get an economic activity that benefits. One of the biggest benefits is going to be India. India is going to benefit by this more than anybody. Maybe China in a way, but I would think a prosperous Middle East is going to be a massive boom for India.
And we'll pick on some of those points in terms of how, or maybe delve deeper into it next time you're on, Richard. But such fascinating conversation. It's very, very insightful and always enjoyable to listen to you. And I thank you for joining us once again, Richard.
Tell my wife, she thinks that too.
That's a good one.
Thanks very much. Look forward to talking to you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Richard. Appreciate it. Well, we'll take a quick commercial break here. We come back in just a bit from now. Continue the show, the program. We have Michael Rubin joining us on the other side, Director of Policy Analysis at the Middle East Forum, as he sort of speaks on the current geopolitical situation, coming up in just a bit. Welcome back. You're with me here on the Global Reset on CNBC-TV18 Prime. You heard Richard sort of talk in depth about where oil goes from here. He thinks oil's headed lower. Well, let me now quickly get you a view in terms of geopolitics and from someone who's better placed than most to comment on the recent developments. Michael Rubin is a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, widely recognized for his expertise on Iran, Turkey, and the broader Middle East. He's a former Pentagon official. Dr. Rubin served as a staff advisor on Iran and Iraq in the Office of the Secretary of Defense. Now, I spoke with him earlier, and I wanted to play out, some sound bites of that interview. So here's the first one. While President Trump, of course, has said that Iran's nuclear program was obliterated, the word that you used, questions remain about Iran's capability in this area. The location of hundreds of pounds of highly enriched uranium, up to 60%. Here is Dr. Rubin on the subject.
Look, Donald Trump is going to talk about anything Donald Trump does with superlatives, but it doesn't necessarily make it true. If the United States has been hand-wringing on the sidelines for so long that allowed Iran to move this nuclear material, that itself is a problem, because 60% enriched uranium isn't enough to make a modern nuclear weapon in the way the United States or India perceives of it. That takes about 20 kilograms of 90% enriched uranium, but you can make a crude nuclear device with that. The nuclear weapon which the United States had dropped on Hiroshima had, on average, an 80% enriched uranium enrichment level, although part of that uranium in the so-called little boy bomb was actually only enriched to 50%. I'm much more worried about the possibility of a suitcase bomb or a dirty bomb, something that might not cause a nuclear explosion, but could spread radiation in a way that could ruin the economy, for example, if it's spread over downtown Tel Aviv or, God forbid, New York City or Mumbai. The fact of the matter is that this has become much more dangerous if the United States has lost track of where that Iranian nuclear material is. Remember, when it comes to Pakistan, the United States has long had contingency plans to send in special forces and secure Pakistani nuclear weapons and nuclear depots should the Pakistani state crumble. The question is, with Iran soon becoming as dangerous, did the United States really drop the ball on its planning?
You know, here in India, we've been, of course, we watched as the Pakistani army chief, Asim Munir, met with President Trump in the midst of, I mean, what was going on a few days back. And of course, now looking at the events as they have played out since, was Iran really the point of the discussion? And what did Dr. Rubin make of it? He has views. Listen in.
In hindsight, it looks like it was about Iran. Look, as you know, I participated in the 2003 Iraq War, granted at a pretty low level. But one of the things which happened, I was on the negotiating delegation to Turkey ahead of the start of the war. And the leaders of our delegation, for example, Ambassador Ryan Crocker, Zalmay Khalilzad, who was a National Security Council official at the time, suddenly had to fly off and go to Geneva. They were meeting with the Iranians, and what they were trying to convey to the Iranians ahead of our war in Iraq was, look, if any American pilots have to make an emergency landing in Iran, if any American pilots inadvertently fly over Iran, we want your assurances that you're not going to shoot at them, you're not going to hurt our pilots, you're going to protect our planes if they're forced to land, and so forth. And the Iranians agreed. Now, granted, they lied, but they agreed. I wouldn't be surprised if something like that was being discussed with Asim Munir, the Pakistani chief of the army who likes to call himself field marshal. The fact of the matter is, Donald Trump was basically telling him, maybe in rhetoric which was somewhat akin to the way Dick Armitage, the former Deputy Secretary of State, once spoke to Musharraf, that if you touch us, we're going to come back against you, and we're going to come back against you hard. What I worry about, however, is Trump's sense of history seldom extends back more than 2 or 4 years, and therefore, I hope that Trump hasn't promised Pakistan anything that could alter or erode India's qualitative military edge.
Here is Dr. Rubin about India's position now and how perhaps, as Dr. Rubin told me, India is the only country which is trusted by all three players in this conflict, which is now hopefully ended: the US, Iran, and Israel. Listen in.
You know, India, of course, doesn't want a situation like this to escalate out of hand. India, of course, is going to have some natural sympathy with Iran because Iran is a trading partner. They have civilizational ties. India also looks at its own internal Shia population as a hedge against radicalism among its much larger Sunni Islamic population. And so India wants to tread very, very carefully here. However, as the expression in American English at least goes, it is possible to make lemonade out of lemons. And I look at India as the only country which is trusted by the United States, by Israel, and by Iran. Therefore, if there's going to be any sort of diplomatic solution to this, in which Iranian nuclear material, for example, is contained, is isolated, is even shipped out of the country, I think India has a far greater role to play there than perhaps even the International Atomic Energy Agency. In 1991, apartheid South Africa gave up its secret nuclear program, and it had actually built nuclear weapons. And even with a fully compliant South African government, especially after the rise of Nelson Mandela, it still took the International Atomic Energy Agency 19 years to complete its job. And that may be even fast by UN and international organization standards. The fact of the matter is, Jerusalem and Washington aren't going to wait that long. So perhaps we can rely in the future on New Delhi to be the intermediary with the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Well, fingers crossed. Maybe it won't come to it, but that's very, very interesting perspective from Dr. Rubin there. Well, that's it I have on this edition of the Global Reset. Thank you very much for staying with us here on CNBC-TV18 Prime. Programming continues on the other side.